My dad found the keys to my safe. I took your $25,000 savings and paid off your brother's debts. You owe the family that much." He smirked. I just nodded and said, "If you say so." An hour later, my uncle walked in and asked, "Where's the investment fund I trusted you with?" Dad's face drained white. I leaned over, whispered 4 words, and watched my uncle dial a number. 15 minutes later, headlights lit up the driveway. I, 29M, walked into my apartment after a brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital to find my father sitting on my couch. Not unusual in itself. He had a key for emergencies. What made my stomach drop was the metal lockbox sitting open on my coffee table, completely empty. $25,000. Gone. I had been saving for 3 years. Every extra shift, every holiday I worked instead of taking off, every dinner I skipped to put away another 100. That money was supposed to be my down payment on a house. My escape from renting. My future. Dad looked up at me with this expression I knew too well. Not guilt. Not embarrassment. Satisfaction. The same look he'd had my entire life whenever he decided what was best for me without asking. He told me he'd taken the money. Just like that. Said it casually, like he was informing me he'd borrowed my car. He'd paid off my younger brother's gambling debts. 32 years old, and my brother still couldn't get his life together. And somehow that had become my problem to solve. I asked him how he even got into the safe. He held up my spare keys, the ones I kept hidden in my bedroom for absolute emergencies. He'd been snooping through my things. In my own home. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. He told me I owed the family that much. That my brother needed help, and I was being selfish keeping all that money to myself when family was struggling. He actually smirked when he said it. Smirked. Like he'd done something noble. My hands were shaking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call the police right then. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the years of conditioning, being told I was the responsible one, the one who had to sacrifice. Maybe it was the sudden crystal-clear memory of every time I'd been forced to give up something for my brother's sake. Instead, I just nodded. Told him if that's what he thought, then okay. The confusion that flickered across his face was almost worth it. He'd expected a fight. He'd probably been looking forward to it, to lecturing me about family loyalty and brotherly duty. He started to say something else, probably another justification, when we both heard a car pull into the parking lot below. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Then my uncle walked in. My uncle, Dad's older brother, was a different breed entirely. He'd made his money in commercial real estate, had a sharp mind for investments, and exactly zero tolerance for foolishness. He was also one of the few people my father actually feared. Uncle asked where the investment fund was. The one he'd trusted Dad with. $50,000 he'd given my father to invest in a property deal 6 months ago. I watched my father's face change color. That smug satisfaction drained away like someone had pulled a plug. He went from ruddy to pale in about 3 seconds. See, I'd figured out what Dad had really done about 2 months ago. I'd noticed him being cagey, making mysterious phone calls, acting weird whenever Uncle's name came up. So I did some digging. Called in a favor from a friend who works in finance. Discovered that Dad had never invested Uncle's money at all. He'd been using it to cover my brother's debts little by little, desperately trying to keep the collectors away while pretending everything was fine. And now he'd cleaned out my savings to pay off the last of it, thinking he was free and clear. Uncle asked again, his voice harder this time. Where was his money? Dad stammered something about the investment taking longer than expected, that the returns would be coming soon. His voice cracked on the last word. I leaned close to my father and whispered 4 words. I know what happened. His eyes went wide. Panicked. He knew exactly what I meant. Uncle caught the look. Asked me directly what I knew. I told him everything. How I'd noticed Dad's strange behavior. How I'd traced the money through my friend's help. How Dad had been systematically draining Uncle's investment fund to pay off my brother's gambling debts. How my $25,000 was just the final piece to clear it all. Uncle's face went rigid. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number without taking his eyes off Dad. Asked whoever answered to come to my address immediately. Said it was a family emergency. 15 minutes later, headlights flooded through my windows. 3 cars. Uncle's lawyer, his business partner, and my aunt. Uncle's wife, who happened to be a former prosecutor. What followed was the most brutal takedown I'd ever witnessed. They'd brought documentation. Printouts of the investment account Uncle had set up. Wire transfer records. Everything neatly organized in a folder that the lawyer pulled from his briefcase, like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. Dad tried to explain, tried to justify, said family helps family, that my brother was in real trouble, that he'd done what he had to do. Uncle cut him off, asked him one simple question. Did he ask permission to use that money for something else? Silence. The lawyer laid out the situation cleanly. Dad had committed embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, possibly fraud. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. This was criminal. My father's face crumbled. He started begging, promised he'd pay it back, asked for time, said he'd made a mistake. Uncle asked how he planned to pay back $75,000, the 50 he'd taken plus my 25. Dad had maybe 15,000 in savings, a mortgaged house, and no other assets. I watched my father realize he'd destroyed himself. The weight of it settled on him like a physical thing. His shoulders slumped. His hands trembled. Then Uncle looked at me, asked if I wanted to press charges too. I thought about it, really thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Dad arrested, to watch him face real consequences for once in his life. But another part of me, the part that was just exhausted, wanted something simpler. I told Uncle I wanted my money back, with interest. I wanted it in writing. I wanted a payment plan that would actually work. And I wanted my father to never, ever have access to my home or my finances again. Uncle nodded. The lawyer started drafting documents right there on my kitchen counter. Dad had to sign everything. An admission of what he'd done. A payment plan that would take him 7 years to complete, garnishing a portion of his pension. A legal agreement that he would have no claim to any of my assets or property. And a restraining order variant that barred him from my residence. Before he signed, Dad tried one last manipulation. Told me I was destroying the family. That I'd regret this. That blood was supposed to be thicker than water. I reminded him that the full quote was, "The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb." That the bonds we choose mean more than the bonds we're born into. And I was choosing to never let him use me again. He signed. They all left around 2 in the morning. Uncle squeezed my shoulder on his way out. Told me I'd done the right thing. That he was sorry he'd trusted Dad with his money, but glad I'd had the courage to speak up. I closed the door and stood in my quiet apartment, looking at the empty lockbox still sitting on my coffee table. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to my father. Really stood up to him. And instead of the guilt I'd been conditioned to expect, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since everything went down. I wanted to update because a lot has happened and some people have been asking. The payment plan is being honored. Dad's pension gets automatically garnished now. Uncle's lawyer made sure it was set up through legal channels so Dad can't just forget a payment. I get a notification every 2 weeks when money hits my account. It's not the full amount yet, obviously, but seeing those deposits feels like validation. My brother called me 5 days after the confrontation. He'd heard what happened. Dad apparently had a breakdown and told him everything, probably hoping for sympathy. Instead of apologizing or taking any responsibility, my brother spent 20 minutes yelling at me over the phone. Called me selfish, said I'd ruined Dad's retirement. Asked how I could be so cruel over just money. I let him rant. When he finally paused for breath, I asked him one question. Had he known Dad was stealing from Uncle and me to pay his debts? The silence told me everything. He'd known. Maybe not all the details, but he'd known the money was coming from somewhere it shouldn't. I told him we were done. That I was finished being the family's personal ATM and emotional punching bag. He called me a few more names and hung up. I blocked his number immediately after. Mom called next. This was harder. She didn't yell, just cried. Said she didn't know what Dad had done until after everything exploded. I actually believe her. Dad kept her out of financial decisions. She asked if there was any way to work things out, to keep the family together. I told her I loved her, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my life for people who saw me as a resource instead of a person. That she was welcome in my life if she wanted to have a relationship with me as her son, not as a fixer for her husband and other sons' problems. She said she needed time to think. I told her I understood and that I'd be here when she was ready. The locksmith came and changed all my locks. New keys, new deadbolt, the works. I also installed a security camera in my hallway and a doorbell camera. Call it paranoia, but I'm not taking chances. Work has been normal, which has been nice. I picked up extra shifts to rebuild my savings faster. One of my colleagues, an older surgeon who I respect a lot, noticed I seemed lighter somehow. I ended up telling him a condensed version of what happened. He told me something that stuck with me. Sometimes the most important surgery is the one where you cut out the malignancy, even when it's attached to something you love. Uncle has been checking in weekly. We've actually grown closer through this. He told me he'd had his own issues with Dad over the years, but had always brushed them off as personality differences. Now he sees them for what they were, a pattern of entitlement and manipulation. He's teaching me about investments, helping me understand how to actually grow wealth instead of just hoarding it in a safe. The house I was saving for? I'm still planning on it. Uncle actually connected me with a real estate agent he trusts. I'm pre-approved for a mortgage and actively looking. Should be able to make an offer in about 6 months if the payments keep coming in steadily. Some family friends have reached out, clearly having heard one-sided versions of the story. A few have been judgmental, saying I should have handled it privately and not gotten lawyers involved. I've stopped trying to explain. The people who matter know the truth. But here's the thing that surprised me most. I don't feel guilty. I keep waiting for it to hit, that crushing sense of obligation that's ruled my life for so long. It hasn't come. Instead, I feel free. I'm sleeping better, eating better. I actually made plans with friends last weekend instead of being available just in case family needed something. It feels strange, prioritizing myself. But it also feels right. Update 2. 2 months in now. Things have evolved in ways I didn't expect. The monthly payments are still coming through automatically. Dad hasn't tried to contact me directly, which I'm grateful for. Uncle mentioned that Dad's been pretty isolated. Some of the extended family knows what happened now, and apparently it hasn't gone over well. Embezzling from family is apparently where even the most family-first relatives draw the line. Mom and I had coffee last week. First time I'd seen her in person since everything happened. She looked tired but more clear-eyed than I'd seen her in years. She told me she'd moved in with her sister temporarily. That living with Dad while he was spiraling had become too much. She wasn't divorcing him, but she needed space. We talked for 3 hours. Really talked. She apologized for enabling the dynamic for so long, for always asking me to be understanding when it came to my brother, for not protecting me better. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until the words came out of her mouth. I told her I didn't blame her, which is mostly true. She was stuck in her own trap, just like I'd been. She asked about my house hunt. Got genuinely excited when I showed her listings on my phone. For the first time, it felt like she was seeing me as a person with my own life, not just a supporting character in the family drama. My brother showed up at my hospital last week. Security called me before letting him in. I'd put him on a list of people to notify me about. I met him in the lobby, public and safe, with cameras everywhere. He looked rough, thinner, tired. He said he wanted to apologize. I waited. He told me he'd been going to Gamblers Anonymous, that he'd finally admitted he had a problem after everything fell apart, that he'd been using the family as a safety net and it had enabled him to keep destroying himself, that what Dad did was wrong, and he should never have accepted that money knowing where it came from. I asked him if Dad put him up to this. He swore he didn't, said he hadn't talked to Dad in 3 weeks, that this was him trying to take responsibility. I told him I appreciated the apology, but I wasn't ready to have him in my life yet, that he needed to prove through actions, not words, that he'd changed, that maybe someday we could rebuild something, but that day wasn't today. He nodded, said he understood, asked if I'd be willing to accept updates on his recovery progress, nothing more. No requests, no contact beyond proving he was serious. I thought about it and agreed. He could email me once a month with updates. I'd read them. That was all I was offering. He thanked me and left. I don't know if he'll actually follow through. Part of me doubts it. But there was something different in his eyes this time. Something that might have been actual awareness of consequences. The house search is going well. I found a place I really like. Small 3-bedroom about 20 minutes from the hospital. Needs some cosmetic updates, but it's structurally sound and in my budget. Making an offer next week. Uncle is helping me negotiate. He's been incredible through all of this. Last Sunday, he took me to lunch and told me something I'll never forget. He said that watching me stand up for myself had inspired him to set better boundaries too. That he'd spent years trying to maintain peace in the family by not rocking the boat, and seeing me choose my own well-being over false peace had given him permission to do the same. It's strange being someone's inspiration. I don't feel particularly brave most days. I just feel like someone who finally got tired of being used. My savings account is rebuilding faster than expected. Between the garnished payments coming in, my extra shifts, and some careful budgeting, I've already recovered about 40% of what was stolen. Uncle's investment lessons are paying off too. I opened a Roth IRA and started actually planning for the future instead of just reacting to the present. A few coworkers know the full story now. One of them went through something similar with his family. They'd expected him to bankroll his parents' retirement while his siblings contributed nothing. He told me it took him 5 years after cutting them off before the guilt finally faded completely. That some days it still hits him, but he's never regretted choosing himself. That conversation helped more than he probably knows. I've started therapy too. Figured if I was going to rebuild my life, I might as well do it right. My therapist has been helping me understand the patterns that were established in childhood, how I was groomed from a young age to be the family's caretaker and financier. It's painful work, but necessary. 3 months ago, I would have done anything to avoid conflict with my family. Would have swallowed my anger, accepted the theft, and probably found a way to blame myself for not hiding my money better. Now I'm buying a house with money I earned and protected. I'm building relationships based on mutual respect instead of obligation. I'm learning what it feels like to live for myself. The headlights in my driveway that night didn't just bring Uncle and his lawyers. They brought the beginning of the life I should have been living all along.